there might be a myth that homeschoolers have trouble getting into college. I'd invite anybody who thinks that myth is true just to Google it. We even have on our SIU website, we have a section specifically dedicated to the things you need to turn into the institution if you're a homeschooler.
Welcome to the Stay at Work Home. We are here to question the prevailing assumptions about the meaning of life, work, and the purpose of people. Instead of being torn apart by our vocations, we want to be pulled together. Come along with us as we change our picture of the good life and pursue the home as God intended, one that worships through work together. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. I am Keith. Becky is not here with me today. I am sorry, but I do have my good friend David Shirley, who is, I'm going to have to read this, and I'm going to try not to laugh, Executive Director of Institutional Effective Research and Planning at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Did I get it right?
Sure. So, yeah, it is.
What does it mean?
It is a.
What would you say that you do?
As far as the general public is concerned, when I say this title, the initial reaction is somewhat of this guy must be a spy, or he made this up or something. But institutional effectiveness is a field that popped up probably 20, 30 years ago. Somebody in it would probably correct me on that and say it's much, much older. But it's
institutions
really
only begun being effective 20 or 30 years ago. Before that, they were... I think it's the other way around, perhaps.
We've never really just cared about what we've done. No, that it's really an effort to look at the institution from a strategic angle. Thinking about things like strategic planning, like assessing what you do, and then really kind of codifying that into an ongoing practice of just really paying attention, using data. And the research side is basically saying, okay, well, we need good data and we need the right data. And so internally we're researching and providing those data and analytics. And then planning is kind of the big umbrella term as well that that's looking at how are we applying that data to our strategy over a longer period of time or shorter period of time, depending on what's needed. So all that to say is that some days I'm the data guy. Some days I'm the strategic planning guy.
Are you the credentialing guy at all anymore?
I am the credentialing guy as well. That falls so.
It's only every few years. Is that right?
So accreditation is kind of the bigger term there. Credentialing is typically going to be considered something along the lines of: are your faculty qualified to do what they do? Right? Do they have the credentials? Okay. And that falls within the accreditation umbrella. In fact, everything falls under the accreditation umbrella because accreditation is basically our big moment to show about every 10 years to our accreditor that, hey, we're doing what we need to be doing, that we're operating in a way that is data-driven, that we have all of our ducks in a row in terms of we have the right faculty in the right places. We've got a board that makes sense and that cares, and that we've got really the structure of the institution moving in the right way, because that accreditation stamp of approval, if you will, is really what allows us to allows our students to take out federal financial aid.
Yeah. And
so it's kind of a follow the money thing, where it's just like that's where the big importance lies with accreditation. Now, it's not always a sexy thing to try to talk about, right? Like nobody gets excited about all of the paperwork that we've got to get together in order to show the accrediting agency that we're doing the right
Just
thing,
thinking
but-
about it causes me to break out in a rash, actually.
Yeah, it's very visible on you.
Thankfully, there's no video
But
with this.
no. I mean, it's just one of those things where at the end of the day, it sounds like the world's worst job. But realistically, what it allows me to do is really maintain what I like, which is a 10,000-foot view of the campus. But also, when need be, I can be like in the details of what's going on. And so, on the other hand, too, I'm also providing a big consulting-like experience for the institution.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So on like, because when we were talking earlier, you were saying like, I don't get to make a lot of like big decisions and like, this is what we're going to do, but you have the ear of a lot of people who do. So you're almost like a permanent internal consultant.
Correct.
That's very interesting. I'm looking at it from that perspective. That does make the job seem like it's not terrible.
No,
like it's actually a really good job.
It's interesting because, many times I find myself in a position of don't shoot the messenger, which is kind of nice. On the other hand, it's just like my message better be accurate.
Yeah.
Right. So the burden of accuracy is really high. But I'm also not providing it's not my consulting, if you want, the consulting angle that I provide isn't directional consulting as much as it is like, so for example, if we're going to say, if say we're not retaining as many students as we'd like to, I'm not going to say like, hey, you need to be doing X, Y, and Z to retain more students, right? I'm not assuming any sort of expertise in the retention of students. What I'm saying is that, hey, it looks like there's certain groups of students based on our analysis that are kind of suffering, right? That might not be getting the experience that they want or were expecting, or we might be underserving in some way. And so, hey, you can go focus on that however you want, right? You're the expert in how to do it, but these are just some groups that you might want to pay attention to.
Which is that's a data thing.
Huge
so
data
you're parsing
thing.
that data. You're doing.
Yep.
So why are you a data? And I don't, quickly on this, because I want to get to the most surprising thing about you. What is your data background? Why do you come to this with the ability to do that?
I completely fell into it. Tripped into it. How was another way to say it? Oops. Yeah. I turned into a data analyst.
What was your education?
So my education had nothing to do with it. I got a psychology degree in undergrad, and master's did counseling.
That does require
degree.
Statistics.
Sure. At undergrad, though, it's very
class,
introductory level at undergrad. In fact, I absolutely hated my statistics course.
Becky hated hers.
In undergrad. And what ended up happening, though, was at the very end of the semester, I remember this vividly, something clicked. And I started looking at statistics as more of a way to tell a story. And in that click, I was like, I think I get it. Well, it's people, but the way that statistics is probability, right? That's really what it's telling you. It's like, what's the probability of any event happening? And so we leverage statistics to determine like, hey, is this event more or less likely to happen? And so the more information we have, the more data we have, the more accurate we become on being able to predict those things. Think of, AI, right? AI is statistics on steroids, where it is using probability type analysis to be able to predict that, hey, it's going to know the right answer among a sea of options, right?
If you type TAY, what are the options? You're not searching Taylor Swift.
Exactly.
Whatever the thing is.
Or if you were looking for a Porsche Taycan, it will actually interact with other AIs because it knows that you like cars, right? And so it'll bump up Porsche instead of Taylor Swift. But all that to
Taylor
say
Swift's
is that
Porsche.
right. Porsche. So all of that, and I'm glad.
I wouldn't get that, but
Yeah,
you would.
yeah,
I would
yeah.
get Taylor Swift's Sob, and it was like Taylor Swift doesn't have an old Sob. So the most I ask all these questions to bring up or to sort of paint the picture of you as a data guy, as a technical guy, as somebody who, even though what was your master's?
Counseling.
So like, even though there's data in that too, but even though that wasn't your education, that's the field you work in, which is, that maybe is a point to come back to later. You homeschool your kids. Goodness gracious. Aren't you worried that they, first off, won't get into college?
I mean, it's a great question. I think there might be a myth that homeschoolers have trouble getting into college. I'd invite anybody. I'm a do your own research kind of guy, right? So I'd invite anybody who thinks that myth is true just to Google it. We even have on our SIU website, we have a section specifically dedicated to the things you need to turn into the institution if you're a homeschooler. And so homeschooling, the homeschooling population has served as a very vibrant population for institutions. and I think the general public who's not homeschooling would be a little bit shocked because the prevailing thought about homeschoolers is that, well, they're getting this alternative education, and are they really learning anything? Well, it turns out that homeschoolers end up being quite prepared for college. Now, there's some data to show that they may not feel very prepared for college, but from what we can tell, like we love them from the institutional angle.
And you're not the only college faculty. Who would you call yourself? Faculty? Is that
staff.
not the right word? Staff.
Yeah.
That I've heard say that.
Yeah.
So they're sought after.
Yeah, they're sought after, and I think at the end of the day, they still have to show college readiness in some form or fashion, right? So it's not like we're just like, hey, put your transcript on crayon and then we'll just accept you because you're homeschooler, right? It's you have to transpose some of the work that you've done.
This is a really good point to tell you. Check out our homeschool transcript guide. There is a link in the show notes.
While you're homeschooled, a lot of homeschoolers opt to do dual enrollment while they're doing homeschool. So maybe their local community college or a local university might have some dual enrollment availability, and homeschoolers will hop on that. And that strengthens a portfolio for a student or admissions application rather. Pretty strongly, right?
You can do that.
You can do college level courses. So again, that and homeschoolers might also opt to take the SAT just to show that they have the academic prowess to be competitive. But institutions right now, our biggest thing is enrollment. Obviously, so we're also trying to be creative on how do we attract different groups of students, and then we're also very interested in, do those students stay?
That is the most interesting. I'm probably going to say that 5 times today. The most interesting. That was a very interesting point you brought up earlier about, I don't care how many people start college. I care about how many people finish college. So if there was a bias 20 years ago, anybody that's clear thinking in the college business at this point better be
probably
better have dispensed with such.
Homeschoolers are getting into Yale, they're getting into Harvard, they're getting into MIT. So back to your point that there's a twofold thing happening. Yes, we really love enrollment. We really want to see enrollment be as high as the heavens would allow. But on the other hand, we can't be a research institution where we have world-renowned faculty and staff and then not have students who are college ready.
Yeah.
And so, this is these are 120 credit hours for a bachelor's degree, right? Realistically, that's 4 years typically at minimum, unless you come in with credits. Then with that, where are you making most of your money? It's not on the first semester. It's throughout the rest of the terms, right? You pay tuition by semester. So if we just have the huge, in other businesses you might call it failure rate, or, we call it retention. I know a lot of businesses do too. If we have a huge issue with retention and that number's really low, then we've got to enroll people at multiples higher than we retain them. So think about like Apple, I think, has a 92% retention rate for their customers. Once somebody buys an Apple product, the likelihood of them going back and buying maybe an Android product as opposed to an Apple product is really low. And that's part of what they do, right? They build this ecosystem to encourage you to keep buying Apple stuff.
A cult. It's dangerous to live. We'll come after you.
But like...
we'll cut your Apple tattoo off your back.
They do it in a pretty ingenious way, right? They have a very closed environment, which is kind of the culty thing. But as they have that environment being really closed, they also can maximize the quality, right? Because they control everything on it. So you click a button on your phone, a junk's going to work. Whereas Google's taken a much more, let's say, maybe democratic approach where a bunch of different companies can use their ecosystem. And they're just like, hey, this is just going to be a broader swath of options. And their retention rate probably isn't as good. People are probably hopping over from Samsung to Google phones to whatever, and maybe to an Apple or back. But their thing is volume, right? So if they can kill it on volume, then they almost don't have to worry about retention so much. If there's a and we've seen it, that Android growth has grown in volume across the world more than Apple by far. And so the same thing with universities, that, we really want, and the same thing but different problem. We can't really operate like Android because we don't have volume.
There's no volume. The volume is gone.
So think about Southern Illinois. If you think about the southern region of Illinois, there's a classical definition for what the southern region is, and it's a handful of counties. But if you really look at the broader southern part of Illinois, from the very bottom all the way up to, say, the bottom of Bellevue, that's 1.2 million people. And so you figure you probably have a good base that you can pull from just even there. And so over the years, I got here last year, our current chancellor got here 4 years ago, we really noticed that...
Was it only last year?
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's weird.
Time does weird things. But we're also getting older, Keith. And the kids make that time. But over the last 2 decades or 15 years maybe, that enrollment just really started to suffer at the institution. What's funny though, guess what happened? Enrollment went down, but guess what happened to retention as enrollment was going down? Retention was going up. And that phenomenon is basically that you have the services and the capacity to almost overserve students, if you will. Pardon me.
Don't call them kids, right?
No, can't call them kids, because a lot of them, I'm a kid to some of them. But we have, when you have an infrastructure that's built for 20-something thousand students and enrollment goes down, your infrastructure is is almost like in hyperdrive for a smaller amount of kids, which tells an interesting story that, hey, turns out college students might need more support than we would have otherwise thought. But also that, as the reverse starts happening, as we start getting more students and these groups being bigger, you've already started to try to right size your existing infrastructure by maybe consolidating some different parts of your staff. And now that enrollment's going back up, we're like, oh crap,
gonna drop?
Yeah, we've got to. Do we have to hire more people now? Like, what do we do? Like, how do we address this? We're anticipating. At least I am speaking in my own capacity here. I'm personally hoping that we'll have another enrollment bump this year.
Yeah.
We were one of 2 or 3 institutions last year that had a bump in the state. And so we're doing all the right things. But long story short is it's this interesting game of really trying to get, again, students who are ready for college, but not just to get them in the door, but to keep them and for them to see the value, and for us to give them that value that they can then take and do whatever they want with, right?
Yeah.
Some folks come in and are looking for that really competitive gig. Some folks come in and just want to do what their heart's desire is, right? And so I think what's really cool about institutions like ours is that we can provide a really robust experience for either one of those populations.
So that brings up another thing I wanted to kind of dovetail in, and maybe we can kind of wrap up with this, is, you are not working in the sphere for which you were educated.
Correct.
And yet you're doing it at what I think anybody could realize is a pretty successful high level. Mm-hmm. There's not a whole lot of light between you and somebody that has like a title that begins with vice or something. You're right up there with them in the same meetings. And what I hear a lot from particularly dads whose wives are trying to get them to homeschool or wish to homeschool their kids is, well, it's not going to prepare them for XYZ. Sometimes they say college. Sometimes they think of particular technical skills. Sometimes they think of just the social experience or whatever. Maybe you could speak to that, because I don't think that's a concern that you necessarily have, and especially as someone who's like, you see the job field is changing rapidly. Mm-hmm. They say like most of the jobs that exist in 10 years don't exist yet, so you can't train for them. You just have to become a really good learner and self-directed.
So you brought what you just ended with there was one of the first thoughts that I had, that, and even in college, we have these things called general education outcomes. Here we call it the university core curriculum. And the expectations here is that we're teaching you how to critically think, how to problem solve, how to quantitatively analyze. Are these things that are teaching you what to think? No, these are furnishing you with the thought mechanisms, or the mechanisms rather, for thought. For processing. One of the most incredible classes I remember taking in college was a logic class. And I was like, like, this is how logic works. And turns out, like, we're pretty much computers, right? Like, we process in zeros and ones. And, not including the emotional stuff, which
we're an electrochemical computer, as opposed to just an electrical computer or something like that. So we process our zeros and ones as chemicals. Yeah, and we're slower. Yeah, but then there's some advantages too.
Yeah. It's fascinating. But I think what's interesting about that, Well, maybe we're slower, but we're also taking in a whole bunch more information.
A lot more, yeah.
Right?
Broader, deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, your computer doesn't have to deal with the biochemistry also going on in our body at the same time that we're also having to process things, right? Like your body has to keep doing the non-thought things as well. But wow, tangent.
Most computers don't last for up to 100 years.
But yeah, so I mean, but even in that is that, we are committed to at the institutional level teaching you higher level concepts and how to navigate those and think through those. And so what's different about homeschool, right? Like, how is homeschool not preparing you to do that? A homeschool curriculum will typically be broader in terms of things like, I mean, Stephanie, my wife Stephanie, has our kids doing these things called nature walks and nature journals. I don't know about you, but I don't remember doing nature walks and nature journals in
maybe
elementary
a walk or
school.
two, but that's no journals.
And I remember my first reaction to this was like, what is happening? And then like the kids, it's fascinating. Over the last, a couple weeks ago, I took the kids on a hike, and just me and the four minions. And every second, hey Dad, look at this mushroom, look at this thing. And the way that they would describe it and talk about it and like genuinely love it, like I was like, these are not my children. Because I'm sitting there and I've always been like this. I just want to get in and get out, right? And so to see them really have an appreciation for nature and be interested in it was really eye-opening to see that like homeschool's also kind of providing that pause that we don't really practice in our traditional kind of upbringing, like, right? Like we are suckers for constant, or at least I am, sucker for constant stimulation,
yeah.
Right? And so those pauses of being able to appreciate what's around, and I mean, again, that's one of those things that becomes very, I would imagine would become very valuable, even as a skill in learning, right? That you're able to, rather than blast through material, that you're able to think about it and be like, organic chemistry, these orbitals might actually make sense for various reasons. Like, and I remember in college taking that class and wanting to just die. I was like, I'm never doing this again. Like, there's an organic chem 2 class? Heck no. Like, I'll change my major. And so, it's this thing where I think, again, that homeschool, for those who might have the capacity, because that is another thing to think about, is that there's, in certain, particularly in more expensive places to live in the U.S., that there is a capacity kind of profile that you might need to have to homeschool. But 9 times out of 10, I would also say that, that's also a personal thing that families have to decide. 'Cause
you'll make the things you want to happen.
You might actually have the flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Should you both come to an agreement that this is what you want to do. But aside from that very personal decision, I would push back and say that in terms of preparation, it's not something that one should have trepidation about. Now, with that being said, let's, to the other question about it making you career ready. To your point, nothing makes you career ready.
But you.
But yeah, I mean, so no. But seriously, I think that that homeschooling can also provide a really good route for for career, because I think one of the things that it also does is that you're already having to do something a little countercultural, a little counterintuitive in some ways. And so when you start down that path, then it invites you to think about countercultural and counterintuitive. And now, since college has become so pervasive, one of the questions that we really ask ourselves in our household is, what do we do if the kids don't want to go to college? If they want to start a business? And then it invites us to think about, okay, how do we play that out? Can we get them ready early? Are there ways that we can really maybe give them some seed funding to start a lawn care company, to start something maybe more manual? On the other hand, if we also see hey, this kid just has something, whether it's they're a pain in the butt because they argue all the time, this kid's going to be an attorney.
That was what I was always told by my mom. It's just you would, if you have an argument with a brick wall, you might win because you really like to argue.
Yeah.
But at the same time, apparently attorneys have to be really good with paperwork.
Yeah.
And that didn't work for me.
No, it's a whole gamut.
But I see it, kind of encapsulate what you're saying here. There's a whole lot of soft skills that need to be developed.
Yeah.
Self-direction is one of those, and the ability to critically analyze things. And homeschoolers do have that space because it just doesn't take 8 hours a day, right, to do primary education.
Yeah.
And so there's that extra time to get their brains kind of wired to do deep work. Like those nature journals, the nature walks and nature journals, that's wiring them to do deeper work. And like in our, we do classical conversations, and in our program, they're doing logic in middle school. That's when they really hit their, they go through their logic stuff. I guess they continue it kind of in high school, but it's all those, it's not the subject matter itself, it's what you're doing with the subject matter. So you came, your person, your brain, the entire you, shall we say, was trained to go figure out stuff, to analyze problems, to maybe softly point people towards solutions, if it made sense, and all that. And so you're using those skills for a subject matter that until you got there, you were not familiar with. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me personally, and it sounds like you're saying the same thing. It's you're preparing them for anything.
So,
and you don't know what they're really going to be doing down the road.
One of the things that I feel that I should say is that I'm a product of public education. Am I saying that homeschool is universally better? No. What I'm saying is that if I grew up homeschooled, would I have ended up on the same path? Probably, maybe. I think what I'm really saying is that I think homeschool is no less, at minimum, homeschool is no less of an potential experience. And I hyphen that potential with the sheer fact that I'm also very convinced that the success of homeschool rides heavily on the parents, right? Because the buck stops with them, right? And so I truly believe that if your desire is to parent your kids, you should be parenting your kids. If your desire is to homeschool your kid, and you can kind of get yourself into that mind space, emotional space to do it, then you can create an incredible experience for them.
The faculty to student ratio is typically
faculty
really good.
Student ratio tends to be much better, unless some of you listening are on the 17 kids. Yeah, and you can do it. But
we're on the 6 and done.
But So with that, I think, there is the reality, though, that you're also having to, just also remember to take, because you can also go to the extreme, right? And then end up wearing yourself ragged. And so you have to kind of, that self-care mechanism that you have in place, those need to be supercharged as well. And as parents, we help each other with that. And
it's much more about facilitating than it is spoon feeding.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And I guess at the end of the day too, you also don't have, here's the benefit of public school as a joke, but I think it's funny. At the end of the day, if your kid just jacks it all up, you can blame public school. Where at the end of the day, if your kid jacks it all up and you homeschool, you ain't got nobody to blame but yourself.
Scary, isn't it? And my wife has obviously taken care of the preponderance of the work with homeschool, and she is really just on fire about not homeschool as just homeschool, but education in general. She is redeeming her own education in the education of the kids. But what's amazing is how resilient they are. Like, I remember, when you're a kid and you're in public school, because I was a public school kid too. You think of your teachers, these adults, as being very different than you. They're so far removed. Clearly they don't just have days when they don't want to go to work, or they come in hungover, or whatever the thing is, right? And no, they're very normal, and they're not always super great at maybe anything, and yet, because you're dealing with humans here, the kids on the other side of the equation, when they actually have some motivation and they want to learn organic chemistry, even under not the best organic chemistry professor, they might end up becoming an organic chemistry genius because they care and they want to learn. And so the biggest thing is obviously just keeping the desire to learn and to enjoy it, and having that flexibility to sort of pursue things that they do want to pursue. They obviously need to be well-rounded enough that they don't have huge blind spots.
Yeah. But
being able to pursue something and get the experience of self-directing, of pursuing, of researching, of analyzing, of coming up with solutions, of testing them, adjusting them, all these things, really, really, really huge. And, kids, to some extent, will self-educate. You continue to self-educate as an adult. And if you don't self-educate as an adult, you're at a dead end. So that's me personally, and I won't make you make this this point or validate it for me. But being able, homeschool gives, for us anyway, as the way we practice it, which is, it's not hands off, but it's with a whole lot of freedom. It gives the kids the opportunity to do those things. Now that a lot of kids, unfortunately, are in the workforce before they are able to try, because they're kind of on rails. And we're not on rails. The guardrails are pretty wide. They're pretty far out there.
52 acres. Man.
That's right. Where are the kids? I don't know. Go ring the bell. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Now I'm going to abandon you and not actually help you with the tub we're supposed to rip out. No, just kidding. We are actually going to go rip out David's tub now. We're going to go do some manual labor because, working is what God made us for, and we're gonna try to enjoy it the absolute best we can.
Thanks for having me on.
This episode of the Stay at Work Home is brought to you by HeartlandBunkies.com. Come check out our full line of small cabin kits that can be easily assembled by a few friends or family in just a weekend for extra space for meaningful connection, or extra income, or a home office, a homeschool room, or whatever.